Thanks everyone for coming. It's my job for the next 40 odd minutes to keep your mind off lunch and maybe talk a little bit about React. So before we get started, I'd like to run a little poll. If I could see a show of hands if you've heard of React before today. Good. Keep your hands up if you've played around with React, have React apps in production, part of the core React team. Good, no hands at, oh, one hand at the end. Okay, I've got someone who can help me if I get stuck, that's good. Okay, so, on with the show. My name is Paul. I work for a digital agency in Glasgow called Equator. I tweet infrequently at Paul, and I have a blog where I blog infrequently at paulaikman.co.uk. That is the entrance to Equator. And this is some people clapping at Equator, probably due to something that happened on the internet. So, that said, that is all of the plugging I'm going to do. So, for the rest of the talk, what am I going to cover? So, the first thing I thought I'd talk about is, why my team chose React over the plethora of other options out there. What should you know if you're about to start React? My ideas for sort of a core concept around React. Not enough time to cover anything in depth, but the idea is if you're interested, this should hopefully give you a slight head start in your learning. Why use libraries like Redux and Reactor? So, the question might be, if React is so great, then why do I keep hearing it mentioned in the same breath as these two libraries? So, the next thing would be, okay, say I've convinced you to try React or to look into React a little bit more. How might you get started with it? And sort of the pitfalls that I saw and I found when I got started with it. And lastly, tips for those about to React. So that's things that I've learned, things that have tripped me up along the way, any sort of pro tips that I could think of at the time that might help you get started. Okay, cool. So, chapter 1, why did we choose React? In my team, we do a lot of sort of a hotel sites and booking engines. So way back in 2010, we did the McDonald's site. And that was in ASP.webforms and jQuery. jQuery was absolutely the thing that you chose at the time. Moving on to 2013, we had moved on to ASP.NET MVC on the back end, and we'd started to play around with libraries like Knockout, which were still very lightweight. They didn't really take much of the heavy lifting away from the back end. Move on to 2015, 2016, we made the shift to using Web API, so we started shifting more of the work that was to be done over to the client side using Angular 1. And then 2016 happened, and then we kept ASP.NET Web API, but then we moved over to React. And then more modern, sort of, we're working on version 2 of Malmaison, Hotel du Vin, for 2018, and that's using React 16. And we have stuck, for once, with our technology. We are sticking with Web API along the way. So, quick, sort of a couple of screenshots. So that's McDonald's, just as a refresh. That's Mal, booking engine for Hotel du Vin, Village homepage, and the latest in the React family that we've released, Glen Eagles. So there you go. So, coming back to that jQuery question. So, 2010, the obvious choice, the only choice really, jQuery. Okay, so history will tell you that if you've ever worked with a jQuery heavy site, that starts off well, everything's fine, and then 2 years down the line, maybe not even that, spaghetti. Just, people just keep chucking stuff in. That's my experience anyway, and just things grow. But, it was obvious where to start. Skip forward to 2016, and you're like, okay, before you even start writing code, is it React and Redux? Is it Angular? Is it Vue? What about Webpack? You know, do I need Gulp? These sort of things. So you're exhausted before you even get started. And that's what I found when I started looking at alternatives to Angular. So to sum that up, you know, we saw a gradual shift from the, you know, the server side of things over to the client side, and that's owing to a lot of things. So in the booking engines, you know, customers and users really expected a lot more from their experience online, and that's, you know, thanks to Facebook and Airbnb and companies that are really pushing the fold. And at the same time, you're getting a lot more rich interaction available via not just the browsers on the desktop. You're getting phones and tablets and things that are becoming more and more powerful along the way, and they can handle a lot of the stuff on the client side without having to go back to the server to render everything out. So in the booking engine example, you know, customers aren't going to be very happy if they go back and every time you want to change your room, it refreshes the page and recalculates. So that's the real reason that, you know, we saw that shift. And as I mentioned as well, so we started off on Village in our sort of a single page application journey with Angular 1. But as soon as we were pretty much finished with that project, Google decided to release Angular 2 and sort of a not kind of like stop working on Angular 1, but there was definitely a lot less focus on that. But what we saw was, you know, Angular 2 was a completely different beast to Angular 1. And we were thinking, okay, well, if we need to like shift everything over, if there's no upgrade path, then, you know, we may as well look slightly further afield and see what's out there. So to move on to replace for the next project, we looked at, you know, as I mentioned, Angular 2, Vue.js, React.js, and Vanilla.js. So that's like roll on your own, you know, make your own framework sort of thing. You know, which some people might want to opt for. So no prizes for guessing what we opted for in the end. And the reasons for me were the big thing about React and the big thing that sold it to me over, especially after the experience on Angular 1, is it's dog-fooded. So, you know, it's maintained and developed by Facebook and the umbrella companies. And, you know, Facebook's lovely $100 billion homepage, we got React in there, you know, and there are other, you know, the other products in the family, Instagram, WhatsApp, they all use React in one way or another in production, so they're actually using what they produce, and that was a big change for me from Angular 1, where, you know, you're looking around the Google estate and you can't really see where they're using it. So that meant for me that there was a sort of an investment in what they're using, putting it there. Second thing was, you know, compared to what we'd seen before, there was certain technology decisions in there that, like for instance, the virtual DOM, which I have no time to get into in this talk. The main thing was the React team had prioritized performance when they were building this library, and they had brought in sort of a concept such as the virtual DOM to definitely focus on making this as fast as they could. And the last thing is the community spirit. So there's loads of community documentations. You'll have seen them yourself if you've looked into it. Documentation, videos, open source projects from companies like Airbnb and others that, you know, even though this is a Facebook-driven project pretty much, you see a lot of other companies making things and put them out there in the community for, you know, companies like us to just go in and go, thanks very much, we'll have that. And this is just a slide with some of the people that have, the companies that have sort of jumped on board the React train over the years. You know, you've got your core people like, you know, Facebook and Instagram, but, you know, picture Skyscanner using them now, Airbnb I mentioned, Netflix. You know, not for everything, but certainly in one way or another, all these companies have dabbled in React over the year. So, you know, using it because all these other companies use it sounds quite shallow maybe, but compared to like the experience with Angular 1, the fact that a lot of companies have kind of bet big on React gave me that little bit more confidence that it was gonna see out more than a few months or a couple of years of use, which is obviously, given the timeline of some of our projects, a big bonus for us. Okay, so there's why I chose it. And I had to think when I was writing this presentation about, what are the core things, if I was to stand here, like I am now, and talk for a few minutes, what are the core things that I would try and get across about React and try and demonstrate about React to give people a flavor of what it's all about. So the things I came up with were components, JSX, and there we go, props, events, and state. So that's, bundle that up, data flow. Okay? So the first one, components. So components are almost like Lego blocks. They're how you think about your React application. And if you have a designer in your team, if you go and speak to him or her, you'll find that this designer probably already speaks about things in terms of components. So if they're designing a menu, the menu component, an accordion, the accordion component, the room chooser component for my classic booking engine example. So thinking about things in terms of like splitting up what you have into its composite parts. Components receive data from the app using something called props, and they also have something called internal state. And this is something that the last part is what some people get hung up on, understandably, because it's so different to MVC frameworks and frameworks like Angular, is the UI logic and the UI description are all in one place. And what that means is you essentially have one file, and it's got the markup that you're going to render out in JavaScript, and it's going to have all the logic to decide what that component's going to do and look like in the same place, which is a major departure from previous frameworks. Second thing, JSX. It looks like HTML. It outputs as HTML. It's not HTML. So the big thing for me is it combines this idea of templating as we would understand it on the front end. It kind of is normal with the sort of full power of JavaScript. So you can fling standard JavaScript functions in there to do sort of a more complex processing or front end logic. And the last part is it can be translated to JS on the fly, as you'll see in a couple of my examples in a bit. But it's typically compiled, so you use something like Babel and Webpack or something like that to compile this thing called JSX into just plain old JavaScript that your browser would understand. Okay, so 10 slides in, haven't seen any code yet. I've just shown it, but here we go. So this is the smallest React example that I could find that I could fit on a slide. But it actually shows you quite a lot. So the first question I had when I was starting out with React is, okay, I have the web page, I have my React thing, how do I join them together? And it took me a while to figure out that React has this sort of a root sort of entry point, which is this React DOM.render. And what this is doing here, the key point is this document.getElement by ID. So what this means is you've got this div with an ID of root on the page, and React will find that and render your React thing out onto the page using the ID, and that's essentially where React sits on the page. So it might be a full page takeover, or if you're using React for just like a little widget on your page, you'll just sort of render it into that div. Other things to note here are there's this thing called a class, which is from ES6, which we'll cover near the end. It extends React.component. This is your first flavor of JSX. So you'll see it looks like HTML, but it's this weird thing called class name, because the word class is reserved in JavaScript, so they sort of just called it something similar. And that will actually output to class of title in the browser, in the DOM. And the render is essentially what it gets rendered out for each component. So that is what will appear on the page for each component. And diving a little deeper into components, what you can do is you can actually compose components. You can, just like normal HTML, these are 3 different components I've created that are just like I showed you before. And the only kind of gotcha for it is you need to wrap whatever you have in your component you need to make sure that it returns as one sort of element. So you can't return header, content, and footer as three separate things. You need to sort of wrap them in something else. Typically, that's a div. And for people, there's going to be some people out there like, okay, so there's something else called fragments that you can use, but typically the rule is you need to return one element from a component for it to render out, which is something I forgot again and again and again when I was building it. Okay, so that covers components at a very high level. So components receive data using props or properties. And I've got, again, as simple as a sort of example as I could get. So again, we're bringing this idea of app into play here. But you'll see I've created this new component called header. And what that is doing is it's being rendered out here. So instead of div or h1 or whatever, you've got this thing called header. And I'm giving it this prop or property of title. And then in the component itself, it's not got the title here of hello DDD18. It's actually got this.props.title. So it's been passed from here into here and being rendered out. And that is essentially how data flows from one part of the app to the next. A few things to note about props is they are essentially and they only flow one way. So you can't get information from here. You can't update this prop and send it back up here because everything's sort of rendered down the way. And that's, again, something that took me a while to get my head around, but you find it can sort of simplify how you think about the data flow within your app once you realize everything's kind of sort of top down. So that's very good, but not all of the things can happen at the very top level of your app. You need to have some way of getting information back up the stack. So the way that you do that is events. So again, using this idea of props, what you can do is, say you've got a component that's got a button in it, and you want to put that somewhere on your page, and you want to be notified when the user clicks the button. So it's all about sort of a user events and things like that. So what you can do is you can use this sort of a props trick, but instead of sending sort of a value down, you can send a function. So in this example, I've brought back our classic app, but our component this time is button component. And then in one of the props, I'm sending this thing down called onCustomClick, sending this event, and then down there, when this button, which is just a sort of a standard HTML button, is clicked, it fires that function, goes back up here, and it's clicked. So that's essentially how you get data from your bottom layer components back up the stack. It's pretty much the only way in React. Again, takes a little bit getting used to, but once you've kind of got the hang of it, it does start to make sense. And the last sort of a core concept for data flow and data itself for me is state. So each component has its own internal state. So this is sort of a self-contained within the app, within the component. Nothing else in your app can really get access to a component state, and it's for its internal sort of a data collection and what's going to be rendered out, perhaps using state. So I've got like a little example here, if it'll load up. Super simple. Oh, there we go. Cool. So what's happening here is every time a second passes in an interval, we're calling this React concept called SetState, which is over here. I'm in the way. We've got this thing, this structure up here called this.state. And essentially what we're doing is every second we're telling React to update the state of that component using SetState to set the time. And SetState is a really sort of an important concept in React because, like, essentially your component, your app will not update until you call SetState. And the reason for that is React just doesn't know. It doesn't just keep tabs on all of your variables. The only way it really knows that anything has happened is because you've called SetState, and it's like, okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go and check the state of all your components and re-render out. Okay, get rid of that mouse pointer again. So, those are the core components of React as I see them. Final part of this is I'm going to try and put all those concepts into a demo that fits on a screen. And this is the light bulb demo. So in theory, what should happen here is I click this button and the light comes on, okay? Let's see. Hey, okay. So what's happening here? Let's move this over a bit. Can I edit on CodePen? There we go. Okay. So what we have here is we have a switch, which is this thing, and we have a bulb. I like trying physical examples, which is this thing, and then we have the app, which contains the switch and the bulb, which is here, if you can see it. So essentially, what's happening here is when the user clicks the switch, it sends an event back up to the app to say, hey, the user clicked this switch. And then the app says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my state up here. And then because we've called SetState, it passes that state down to the components. So if you look at switch on is false, toggle switch, it does this.setState on, and then you've got these two components that take is on as a prop. Where are we? Oh, can't really see it. I'll scroll down. Here. Okay. And this, what confused me at the start was, okay, why don't we just have all the state in the switch? Because I was thinking if it's a physical thing, then the switch should know if it's on or off. So what you need to do, React has got this sort of a concept of pulling up state. So if two things need to depend on whether the switch is on or off, you should find like a common component that sort of bridges them both. So when that state is updated, you can easily pass it down. So that's why the event is on there. And what's actually happening here is the app essentially updates and it tells the switch whether it's off or on. So it sends its state back down. And we can do the same with the light bulb. So, it's a really simple example, but what I hope I can do is because these are components, I should be able to add a couple more in, and in theory, it should all just link up. So I've just copied and pasted the bulb a couple of times. Boom. They all come up. Yeah, they all came on. Good. So that's the sort of idea, and that's the sort of power behind components. So once you have your sort of building blocks for your application, you can start to use them in different ways. And because they don't have sort of a contextual information about what your app's doing, you can actually, once you have your library of things, you can take them out of where you use them and you can use them other places. And that's, where the power of React comes for me. I can build an accordion or a gallery, and it doesn't really care if it's in a booking app or a website or, a mobile responsive app. It doesn't care as long as it receives sort of a props and it displays, and if there's events to fire, it'll fire them, and it doesn't really care what happens after that. Okay. So that was a whirlwind tour of React. The second sort of a part is, as I was saying earlier, if React is so great, why would you want to use libraries like Redux and Router? And what's the point of these libraries, and why are they so popular? And, when they're mentioned in the same sort of a breath as React. So I found the answer on the React website. Sort of tried to circle it. So even the React creators have sort of mentioned that this is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So the React team have sort of decided they're going to do pretty much one thing and one thing really well, and that's library for user interfaces. They're not really concerned about sort of a data flow for large apps or concern themselves with routing for multi-page apps. They're just really worried about creating a library for user interfaces. And that's not to say that you can't use React by itself. So for those smaller examples and for smaller apps that maybe don't need a lot of kind of state or aren't multiple pages, you can get away with using React by itself. And that's one of the sort of benefits of using React, is it's a little bit more flexible than a sort of fully fledged library that comes with everything. So I'll cover Redux soon, first, sorry. Try and explain it in 3 slides. This will be interesting. So as your app grows, so do your state and your interactions. So you've got, fair enough, 2 components, absolutely fine. A light bulb and a switch, perfect. Okay, so what if you wanted to add an Alexa interface in there? What if you wanted to add multi-room lights? It gets a little bit more complicated to manage all the interactions between the components. The data needs to be shared around the app. So, you know, maybe you've got, take the e-commerce example, maybe you've got a user selecting a room or an extra. That needs to propagate all the way back up to the top of the app and all the way down to like the basket or the price component. So what Redux is really saying is, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we could store some of this sort of a shared state centrally and being able to access it without going all the way up and all the way down the sort of a component tree. And I've stolen some diagrams for this. So without, this is the sort of a classic without Redux example. So you've got your component down here. And again, let's take the e-commerce example. You know, you update something here and say, you know, you've got 2 or 3 things that need to be notified or need to know about or re-render based on the information for this. So you might need to pass your event up to the top level where everything connects and then start passing down. And some of these components really don't care about some of the props that are passing through them. So they just don't care whether the cost is updated or the products are updated. But because they have, for instance, the price, there's a price component further down that they have sort of a nested within them, they need to pass that down. So this is the extreme many sort of a arrows example. And what Redux tries to do is it says, okay, what I'm going to do is when a user sort of when a user does something or when an event happens in a component that updates the state, what we're going to do is we're going to publish it to this thing called the store. And then what we're going to do is there's going to be other components that are interested in these updates listening to that store, and they're going to update as and when they need to. So this is the sort of a blown up Redux example. So in this example, say the user clicks something here, that might dispatch. So you've got this thing called an action, but you can include some data with the action. So maybe the user selected a specific, you know, bouquet of flowers or something like that to add to their e-commerce basket. That information might be sent up to the store, and then say this is like the sort of a basket component, maybe the continue button, something like that. They're all listening out for if the user's selected something, and they'll update accordingly. So it's really about data flow, which is one of the things that I found really difficult as my app started to explode out the way. So as a real life example, let's take Gleneagles, one of our latest kind of React sort of apps. So here the user's, you know, selecting bed and breakfast, £275. So the app is essentially waiting for the user to do something. This is a component here. It says, okay, users selected this room. Because of that, this is the sort of a summary bar here. The room selection will update, the price will update, the continue button might light up. And there might be other things that happen. So like, okay, you've selected your room. Okay, why don't you just add some breakfast or whatever? You know, so there's lots of stuff that can happen. It's not just like one thing happens and then that causes one other thing to happen. One thing could happen and then multiple things could happen. And that's where the power of Redux comes in. Okay, so Redux core concepts. So there's the store, which you will have seen on the diagram. So that contains all of the state within the application. There's actions, so to cause something to eventually end up in the store, you need to raise an action, which is, you know, it might be user clicked on this and selected this. And then you've got this strange concept of reducers. So what these do is these sit in between your app and your store, and they make sure that data gets into the store in the right format. And they sort of like structure the data in the right way and make sure updates happen correctly. There's a great set of tutorials by a guy called Dan Abramov, which I'll link to the end of this slide deck. If you're interested in this, I highly recommend going through it. They're free and they're on egghead.io. Brilliant resource. I went through them like maybe 4 times before I understood this properly. Okay, so that's Redux. The second more kind of hopefully obvious one is React Router, and why do you need it? And some of the sort of reasons that I came up with that you want to use this, a library like this specifically, would be, you know, the most obvious one is, you know, larger apps, if you're building a single page application, are going to need more than one screen. So React Router gives you a way to change the view, change the component that the user sees based on the URL. And it gives you some nice things as well. So like there's nested views, you can look at URL parameters, and so on. So, you know, you might end up baking some of this into your app yourself, but it is handy to have a library out there that sort of got some of the stuff built in. So here's a really super simple example. So you've got your, everything again is a component, strangely enough. So you've got your root component, and then depending on the path in the browser, oh, there, it'll render out a specific component. Here, and you can do some sort of a more interesting stuff. So if you've got a category of, I don't know, albums or something like that, you might want to pass that into the component via the URL, so category / rock or something like that, or blues, and then that'll be passed to the category component so it can do something different based on what you pass in. So that's the libraries. Say you're interested. So the question, you know, a lot of people come up to me, even within, you know, Equator, is, you know, I like what I'm seeing about React, but there's just so much out there. How do I get started with it? The first thing I would say, ES6. So this is sort of like the latest sort of, or not even the latest anymore. The sort of the mainstream sort of standards sort of agency almost for JavaScript, and they've released a bunch of updates under ES6 or ES 2015, depending on who you subscribe to. And this has got a lot of stuff that I hadn't seen until I started looking at React-specific things. And so you'll have seen classes earlier. This is where classes come from. There's a lot of nice things like string formatting, this weird concept of fat arrows. So the issue I had when I started off learning React wasn't React itself. It was this crazy new syntax that I had no idea existed before, because I was just in sort of a jQuery and Angular 1 land. I hadn't really had a cause to look at it. So when you're looking at tutorials and sort of things for React, what I'd recommend is probably have the Babel. This is a great resource, the Babel sort of a docs. I've left a link to it in the slides, open in a tab, just so when you're like, okay, what is this strange sort of equals arrow thing? You can go back to it and you can figure it out, because you know, when you try to learn something new, it's good to be able to focus on just the thing that you want to learn and not have to worry about all this crazy new syntax. The second thing is, okay, I've done some tutorials. I want to create my first app. I want to go and actually make something that's going to end up on the internet. How do I do it? And it's like, oh yeah, just use one of these 6,000 ways to build your React app, and it'll be absolutely fine. And oh, by the way, they update every 2 minutes, so good luck with that. So we sort of started off with so many options, and the problem is integration. So we had some apps that we want to use a little bit of React in. We wanted to start some React apps from scratch. So our build environment right now is, or was, Gulp. So we're like, okay, we need to try and build React with Gulp. And then for brand new apps, everybody's saying, okay, you should move to Webpack. And I was like, okay, right, I got to learn Webpack and ES6 and React and Redux. So my advice would be to build up slowly and add only what you need. So when you get something running, just make sure you sort of understand it from that perspective, and then you can worry about adding like reload and hot module reload and compression and all these sort of things, because there's so many options for these tools that it can be a bit daunting. But luckily, this is sort of a more recent thing, is there is a better way to get started than sort of working your way through all those tools. And I've got a little video of it here that is slightly sped up, but not too much. It's called Create. I never fixed that spelling mistake. Create React app. I've been that for days. Right, here we go. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm Googling it on GitHub, installing it, and then it gives you like a little command line tool here, create React app. This is the slow bit, this is why I sped it up. My internet's really slow. Okay, go into Visual Studio Code, formats it wrong, fix that, start it. Boom, React app, 47 seconds, there we go. So this is from some of the sort of a core React team, and what it is like this project that allows you to download it, install it on your command line, and you can essentially type create React app, and it'll go and create all the structure for you, the basic structure. It'll allow you to it'll put Webpack in. Essentially, all you have to do is go in, put the React stuff in that you want to put in, type in npm run start. It'll boot up this lovely browser. And then you can start reacting away. So it's that sort of a kickstart into actually what you want to do rather than mucking about with build tools. Okay, so Homerun, tips for those about to React. What I would say is from experience, your team will be slower. It might be obvious, but it is so different to MVC, to Angular 1, to jQuery, that it will trip. It trip me up. I would say it trips everyone up in some way when you start. And there's this argument about, are single page apps slower to create in general? I think probably yes, but there are advantages to doing it anyway. As I mentioned earlier, ES6 is very nice, but it's very new. I expect that to cause you a bit of pain along the way. Again, worth learning. Once you spend all this time learning React, you'll be like, everything should be done in React. It's amazing, But there is a sort of a cost to, as I say, running with React. And maybe if you think about it, you're like, okay, maybe this could just be like a little MVC application or something. Do we need this much interaction in our app? JSX, we still have these arguments in the team. It's like, I don't like my rendering HTML stuff in JavaScript, and I can see that. It's sensible to want to separate out, as we do with CSS and your sort of your markup. It's sensible to separate some of these things out. So it does get a bit of getting used to. The browser dev tools are really great. So I didn't have time to show it today, but there are React tools, plugins for Chrome and other browsers that allow you to see the React structure. And more importantly for me, they allow you to see a Redux structure, so you can see the data that's flowing around your app. And it's because everything's sort of immutable and things like that, you can actually go back in time and forward in time because everything's just copied down each time. I just mentioned that word, immutable data. So I mentioned before that everything's sort of copied down. And it was really tricky for me to get started with that because I was like, okay, wait a minute, I need to copy my data. I can't just update this variable. And that was kind of tricky for me, and especially when you're dealing with complex data structures like arrays. How do I update this array without just adding something else into it? Do I need to copy the full thing and then put something in the middle? So once you get your head around that, that's kind of fine, but it does make it a little bit more difficult to work with data sometimes. As I mentioned with the build tools, expect things to change. That's both bad and good. So it's good that things are moving really fast, and we've got a lot of momentum behind this sort of ecosystem, but it's bad that you read a tutorial that was written a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, you go and try and use it and some of the syntax has changed, and you're like, oh geez, I just want to learn this stuff. It's not as bad as it was a year ago or so things are settling down a little bit. But the final thing I would say, which is definitely a good thing, is you'll pick up transferable skills. So you've been through the pain of learning Webpack, of learning how ES6 works, and if you decide that React isn't for you, or your team decides React isn't for you, you've picked up a lot of things, so you know how to build sort of a modern JavaScript libraries. You've probably learned a little bit about reactive programming. Like a lot of the sort of you'll probably know a little bit about the performance that you get of Virtual DOM, which a lot of the other libraries have adopted. So you'll know a lot, even if you get to the end of this this period and go, actually, React isn't for me. So it's good. It's good that you won't feel like you've wasted your time. So we've spent 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Hope everybody knows React.js. I would say that, I gave myself a bit of a challenge that, this talk wasn't just about React. I was like, okay, let's just add in Redux and Router, and that's meant that I couldn't really go into it. Any one of those topics could easily take an hour, a day, a week to try to go in and deep dive it. But my idea with it for this talk was to really give a sort of an overview of, my experience with it, and for those that are new to React or about to React, a little flavor of the sort of core concepts. So I hope it's been useful. And I'd like to open up to any questions. Yes, sir. Yes. I would probably, to be honest, so the question was, can we go from Angular 1 to React? And to be honest, a lot of it, pretty much all of it, will probably be a rewrite, unless you've got sort of a common, the saving grace might be if you've got, common sort of services or, that are just written in pure JavaScript, because at the end of the day, everything is just JavaScript. So you'll be able to save those. But in terms of everything else, like your UI, you'll probably be looking at a rewrite for that. But if it's just a straight sort of a rewrite, it might be easier because you know how everything should work. You don't have to like redesign it or anything like that. It's a good question, and everybody will give you a different answer. I mean, as I said, people are going to have their own reasons for it. But the thing that sold me on React was I feel like I kind of got a little bit. This is all opinion, but a little bit stung because the Angular 1 to 2, there wasn't much investment in terms of like dog fooding. So like it felt like the team were like not provide an upgrade path, which might or might not be true, but just from my perspective, and because React is actually used in-house, I've gone from, you'll seen from the slides we went to, I think we started on React 14, we're now at 16. The changes are very, very slight, and it does actually give us loads of warnings. It's like, this will disappear in one version, please upgrade to, I think it was classes. They had a different way to do component classes, but they did actually warn us for ages. And we're obviously going to just wait till the exact last minute to do that, like everybody does to change everything over. But there does seem to be like that idea of longevity for React, which for a company like ours is really good. Yes? TypeScript, I'll be absolutely honest, I haven't really looked into it much. I saw Angular 2 was used. That's another thing to learn, and that's really bad. And as most of my job when I'm not dabbling in React is actually back-end C# and APIs and stuff like that. So I really do love typed languages. But when you've got a team that are looking to transfer, you're like, okay, we're going to learn this new thing, and also you need to learn this. So it's just like, I think we're going to get there eventually, but I'd like to do it as a gradual transition that isn't a barrier for anything else happening. If that makes sense. Yes?
I was wondering how you have the logic for changing contents of a view depending on the state. Like, for example, when you showed a component made out of subcomponents,
yeah.
Say that was like a part of a dashboard, and if there's no data in the dashboard, you might want to show different components than fruit, for example, or a recipe of food.
Yeah.
Should that go inside? Do you put logic for that inside the header component, or is there a better way of handling it?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends. It's the get out answer for everything. So yeah, we have a lot of that. So in the booking apps that we build, there's two major things that could happen. Either when you do a search, availability comes back and everything's peachy and you select your room, or the alternative is there's no availability and you have to show like an empty state. that is where the power of JSX comes in, where you can actually look at the state to say, look, are there any results or not? And then you can sort of do like almost like an if and render out two completely different things based on that. Just because it's sort of pre-rendered and rendered straight out to the DOM, there's no sort of a hidden elements or anything there. It will just be like rendered out the thing that the user wants to see. So I guess the answer is we use a lot of conditionals and JSX and things, but we sometimes pull things out into like functions. That means like your JSX block isn't like massive. We'll maybe just render something in a function. Okay, cool. Any questions? Cool. Well, I hope that was entertaining, and you can now think about lunch again. But if there's any other questions about React or opinions or anything that you like to share with me, please grab me afterwards, or follow me on Twitter, where I will try and remember to put the link to the slides up. Okay, thanks very much.